Steve Phelps is out as NASCAR commissioner. There's a lot of rejoicing about that on NASCAR social media and the comment sections. I don't know that the same rejoicing, though, is as evident throughout the NASCAR industry, and I'm going to tell you why. So first of all, from a fan standpoint, I get the sentiment. Steve Phelps, for a long time, was the face of a lot of decisions that people didn't like, whether that was the Black Lives Matter, Confederate flag, Bubba Wallace stuff. Remember, he's the one that went to Bubba Wallace's bus and said, "We found this," and cried. Even fans going back to that have not liked Steve Phelps because of his involvement in that. They think he's woke, right? So clearly you're not going to change those people's minds no matter what he did decision-wise, and so they're going to be happy no matter what. So that's one section of the fan base. Another section of the fan base is obviously they feel like he's responsible for the competition type decisions and things like that. Well, it's not necessarily true. I mean, he was the face of a lot of it, but part of that is because NASCAR chairman and CEO Jim France has never done a news conference. So for a long time when Steve Phelps was president of NASCAR, he's the one doing the state of the sport. He's the one speaking on behalf of the sport. Yes, you had Steve O'Donnell there as well. Even when Steve Phelps moved up to commissioner, Steve O'Donnell becomes president. Steve Phelps is still up there, speaking on behalf of the sport. He's taking a lot of the heat when fans see the explanation from NASCAR about these decisions, and Jim France is not as out front, obviously, because he doesn't have to talk about it, so he stays behind the scenes. Obviously, another part of the fan base then is viewing him very negatively for the communications that came out as a result of the antitrust lawsuit, the stuff he said about Richard Childress, saying that he was a stupid redneck, ass clown, needed to be taken out back and flogged, talking about putting a knife in this trash series when he was talking about SRX. I mean, I think the Childress stuff in particular was what really hurt him, bloodied him to a great extent. The Johnny Morris letter, Johnny Morris of Bass Pro Shops released a public letter the night before the trial, the lawsuit was settled, and raised questions about Steve Phelps' leadership in a major way. I don't know that there was a path coming back from that, and certainly the fans, a lot of fans felt the same way about that. But again, from an industry standpoint, I don't know that sentiment is that widely shared, and it might be somewhat flipped. Inside the garage, Steve Phelps had a lot of respect, was known as sort of being this calm, steadying presence. You never really saw him frazzled or upset or lose his cool. The closest he ever came to it was in the trial, on the stand, being questioned by Jeffrey Kessler. Really, Steve O'Donnell of the two Steves has a reputation for more being a little bit more sensitive and getting his temper up more quickly when things happen. Whereas you didn't really see that from Steve Phelps, or I don't think anybody saw it publicly. We did see it obviously in these communications, but in terms of the dealings he had with people in the garage, I think typically he was a pretty calm, steadying guy. Again, along those lines, both Steves in the garage are viewed as sort of reasonable people, and their communications, even during the trial, came to reveal them as moderates, right? They were trying to help the team. They wanted to advocate for the team. They were trying to push for ultimately what the teams ended up getting as part of this trial. It was Jim France who did not want to give them these things. Steve Phelps even was quoted, now he didn't confirm this in the trial, but they presented him with evidence saying that he told Rick Hendrick, "Look, we'd love to give you permanent charters, but Jim doesn't want to." The Steves wanted to be more team friendly in terms of the negotiations and didn't want to take the hardline stance. Ultimately, though, they work for Jim France. They work for Lisa France Kennedy. Jim is calling the shots. And when your boss says you're going to do something, ultimately, you're going to carry out those orders. You're going to carry out those directions. And yes, that does include competition-related decisions because the buck stops with Jim. Anything that goes through NASCAR leadership becomes a recommendation that they need to take up to Jim for yes or no approval on it. So while I get the fan base is looking at Steve Phelps going, this is the guy that was responsible for so much, hate to break it to you, not much is going to change with this at all. If you think this is the moment when, now Steve Phelps is out, this is the start of a new leadership era, no, that's just not the case. In fact, without Steve Phelps there's a greater chance that this gets destabilized for a little bit. I don't see them necessarily filling that position. That was sort of a commissioner position created for him as he was looking at broader strategy. It sounds like they're just going to backfill that with having his duties more go to Steve O'Donnell and other people, Ben Kennedy, within the leadership team. So I'm not seeing where this is actually going to make NASCAR any better with the addition by subtraction. What it does do from NASCAR standpoint, though, is it takes away the person that was, again, the most bloodied and bruised coming out of the trial, right? I mean, because of the communications, because of the Richard Childress stuff in particular, Steve Phelps came out probably looking the worst. And sure, you had some fans out there, you had a sentiment on social media that says, I'm not going to spend another dollar on this sport until guys like that are gone. They want to see both Steves gone. Again, I personally disagree. I wrote for The Athletic last month that Jim France, if this has showed us anything, it's time for him to resign. Think about what the outcome of the trial ultimately was. What the teams got in the settlement, and they decisively won, was the things that they were asking for 2 years leading up to the trial that was absolutely rejected over and over again despite pleas from multiple team owners, including Jim France's closest friends in NASCAR, Roger Penske, Joe Gibbs, Rick Hendrick, all asking him for permanent charters, all asking him for a better deal. And the answer was no every time. The Steves wanted to give the teams that better deal. It was Jim France who didn't. And by Jim France's stubbornness, ultimately it resulted in this lawsuit. Now, they could have also settled the lawsuit before it even went to the trial. And if they had settled it, the communications that ultimately damaged Steve Phelps so much that he was forced to resign, it seems like that was the big moment anyway, that stuff would have never become public. Richard Childress would have never had a reason to be upset with Steve Phelps because he would have known that Steve Phelps said these things about him. Those would have stayed private text messages, private emails. So Jim France, whatever you want to say, he ultimately made a giant miscalculation because they ended up having to give the teams exactly what they wanted, and they got NASCAR's entire business model exposed, the France family's finances exposed, all these communications exposed. So he ends up damaging and destabilizing his own leadership structure by not settling this or not giving the teams what they wanted in the first place. To me, if it shows anything in terms of a leadership change, that means it's time for Jim France to step aside and say, hey, I've had a good run. It's time to turn it over to the next generation. And the Steves have been a good mentor for Ben Kennedy to learn from. Obviously, Ben Kennedy is part of the France family, is being groomed. As long as the France family continues to own NASCAR, a France family member will be the head of NASCAR, you would assume. So again, I get it. People didn't like Steve Phelps. They're happy to see him go. They thought this was a win. But again, be careful what you wish for. NASCAR just lost one of the most respected people within the garage, and it's tough to see how NASCAR will get better because of that decision. So where's the disconnect? Is it just that fans have a perception of the leadership and are going to be inclined to dislike whoever is the commissioner, whoever is the most public-facing figure of the sport when things go bad? Because in that case, I guess Jim France has done the good thing by not putting himself out there for media opportunities and speaking on behalf of the sport, because it was Steve Phelps speaking the most, and then when things went bad, he became the fall guy. You could also argue that the leadership structure was not as apparent publicly until the trial, which maybe some fans are still trying to catch up on. Maybe people didn't follow it as closely. Internally, I think people within the NASCAR world understood that Jim France all along is the decision maker. And again, that was very much confirmed during the trial. So from that regard, what is it really that you're happy about that Steve Phelps has gone for? Is it the Childress stuff? Is it that you feel like he was woke? What is it that you think is going to be so much better now that he's gone and that he deserves to essentially be forced out with no pathway back? Obviously, everybody has a right to their own opinion, but I'm just curious where this sentiment is coming from. Leave me your thoughts in the comments below, and I will talk to you next time.